The trial of disgraced surgeon Paolo Macchiarini is due to conclude just a couple of days after I'm recording this. His wild story involves scientific fraud, death, betrayal, a love parallelogram, and the Pope, and his charge in the Swedish courts is aggravated assault for performing unlawful surgery on multiple people, most of whom died. But just a few short years ago, he was the toast of the medical profession, with fawning articles singing his praises, a 2-hour NBC profile, and a showbiz life. And then, a sudden and spectacular fall from grace. And yet, his trajectory is far from unique. So let's examine the phenomenon of the superstar doctor. When I say celebrity doctor, you probably think of someone like Dr. Oz, perhaps the archetype for medical influencer. Now, believe me, I have lots to say about celebrity medical grifters. I have something of a morbid fascination with them, which sometimes manifests itself as sarcastic Twitter threads or videos about Instagram doctors flogging some snake oil, but this video isn't about doctors who develop a media career and misuse their fame from social media or something. In fact, medicine has a celebrity problem that long predates social media or even television. People have always romanticized the role of the doctor. Throughout history, word would spread of a gifted healer, attracting people over huge distances. Whether they were actually effective is a separate question entirely, but while historians in other fields have suggested moving away from the great man model of understanding the past, in medicine it's pretty much been par for the course. In the era of evidence-based medicine, should we still be practicing eminence-based medicine and elevating academic researchers or clinicians to rockstar status? Ironically, it's often those most dogmatic about preaching the gospel of science that get most caught up in the hype, perhaps because they better understand the promise of whatever the scientist is claiming. Snooty people might look down their noses at those who believe in pseudoscience that they hear from Gwyneth Paltrow or Joe Rogan, but they engage in the same magical thinking when it's packaged in a way to appeal to their own biases, i.e. by donning the clothes of respectable science. Or sometimes, even the most discerning of commentators are deceived by out-and-out fraud. When we start treating scientists like stars, we end up with many of the problematic traits of fandom that we find elsewhere, with the celebrity exploiting and lying to those that support them because they believe in their cause. And while Instagram influencers can defraud viewers of some money, these scientists and doctors are occasionally granted power over someone's entire life. The pandemic has seen people like Didier Raoult and Pierre Corey become legitimate cult figures with devoted followings who believe with every fibre in their being that hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, respectively, are wonder drugs that are being suppressed by the pharmaceutical industry and could end COVID overnight. On the other hand, Anthony Fauci has also become a similar pseudo-religious figure, inspiring fanatical support even when he's made mistakes. In none of these cases were devotees won over by actual evidence. They were caught up in the fairy tale of a medical saviour, and based on their pre-existing biases, they found their personal Jesus MD. Now, I'm not suggesting any of these people initially set out to deceive anyone or even encouraged the kind of following that they attracted, but they serve as evidence that the cult of personality infects every field. However, sensible advice for YouTube scripts as well as real life: let's avoid COVID, shall we? I recently made a video about the unrealistic over-optimism in the field of longevity medicine, and a closely related field, which again has some incredible and entirely legitimate research going on, alongside all kinds of quackery and biotech VC-fueled hype, is that of regenerative medicine. The promise of regrowing organs and tissues and offering hope to some of the most desperate people who have so far been let down by medical science. Let's explore 3 fascinating chapters in regenerative medicine's patchy track record. I'll start with a story that I'm sure many of you remember. Italian neurosurgeon Sergio Canavero made international headlines around 2015 when he said he was close to performing the world's first human head transplant.
The chances of this working are 90%. Of course there is a marginal risk. I cannot deny that.
He gave TED Talks, countless interviews with magazines and newspapers that all responded with the same breathless wonder at this pioneer, forced to move to China after being shunned by his closed-minded former establishment for his experimental, bold ideas, or so his narrative went, but on the cusp of something truly momentous. Now, this is a key trope to remember, the iconoclast or whistleblower whose colleagues try to silence him. And there is historical precedent here. The medical profession treated Ignaz Semmelweis awfully, who suggested that doctors should wash their hands, and of course he was proved to be right. But modern celebrity doctors love to frame themselves in the same way. I'm no neurosurgeon, but I've done a fair bit of transplant medicine, and Canavero's claim rang a lot of alarm bells from the start. It was simply inconceivable to make such an enormous jump in our abilities from where we are now. That's just not how something like this works in science. It's much more about slow, incremental progress, especially when you're considering something as complex as transplantation. Canavero claims that he was inspired by the work of Robert White, who transplanted multiple primate heads in the 1970s, which Canavero refers to as successful operations. In recent years, he and his Chinese collaborator Ren Xiaoping claimed that they have performed the world's first successful human head transplant. A small detail, which I believe is important here, is that this was performed between two corpses. Successful.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
One can't help but think of the famous joke about a stereotypical surgeon who proclaims the operation was a complete success, although the patient died. Yet somehow this seems even more ridiculous because both patients involved were actually dead before the operation even began. So this is chapter 1 in the rockstar doctor playbook. Short of actually lying, learn to be conservative with the truth and allow people to draw their own incorrect assumptions. In this case, it's evident that Canavero, Ren and their team have made huge leaps in terms of surgical precision at reattaching the myriad blood vessels and structures in the neck to at least give them that benefit of the doubt from what they've reported. But one minor thing remained, just a small thing, an afterthought really, a mere contrivance: the spinal cord. Yes, this is probably where my definition of successful diverges ever so slightly from Canavero's. Call me a stuffy old traditionalist, but I quite like it when a freshly attached head can actually control its new body. While attaching everything else is impressive, this is such a monumental problem that it's akin to me excitedly telling you that I'm just days away from staging a successful Jackson 5 reunion tour because I only need to find one more member of the group. When quizzed about it, he said he'd use polyethylene glycol glue, sometimes called PEG. Yes, meticulous microsurgery for all the blood vessels, but his strategy for the main information superhighway to the brain, which we don't even fully understand, was no more sophisticated than a 5-year-old's plan to reattach the head of a beetle they just decapitated. Or in Canavero's own words, you cut the spaghetto, you apply the peg, and boom! Polyethylene glycol, by the way, is most commonly used as a laxative. It does show some promise in assisting with the healing of spinal injuries, but healing a completely transected spinal cord has never been observed and has never been achieved in any of Canavero's successful operations on any species. What actually irritates me most about this story is how journalists, especially science journalists, just reported his statements as if they were fact. Many repeated this lie that Robert White's 1970s head transplants that so inspired him were a success, with many outlets saying that a monkey with a head transplant had full use of the donor body. A basic fact check takes just minutes. I know it can be difficult to ascertain who to believe when you're unfamiliar with a certain field, but I would humbly submit that if the doctor in question does a photo shoot like this about what is purportedly a serious medical procedure, that might be a red flag. But unlike my next two subjects, Canavero has not been accused of fraud, simply telling tall stories or overambitious claims. So now let's head to Boston. In the last 2 decades, the field of stem cell research has been one of the most exciting avenues in medical science. The idea that we could tell these pluripotent cells to become any tissue that we wanted was the holy grail. But heart disease, the biggest killer worldwide, seemed out of reach even to stem cells. There are no stem cells in the heart, and heart muscle cells simply don't regenerate. Until that all changed when Piero Anversa and his team presented and published work in 2000, 2001, 3, 4, showing there is a way to repair damaged heart, that stem cells could be used to regenerate heart muscle tissue, alleviate the suffering from heart failure, and literally save millions of lives. It's no exaggeration to say this was blockbuster research, and Anversa absolutely became a rockstar doctor with a financially well-supported lab and, in a pattern that you'll be familiar with by now, newspaper coverage and world fame. But this chapter would come to a close just a few years ago, 2018, 2019, with Anversa and multiple collaborators disgraced, over 30 studies retracted or in the process of being retracted, and Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital ending some $10 million short that they had to pay to the US government for obtaining research funding fraudulently, although many think that sum is far too small. So chapter 2 of the Rockstar Doctor playbook would have to be building up such an exciting head of steam that it's almost impossible to turn back or turn the ship around. When you build someone up as your star player, bringing in the press and the big bucks, publishing in the biggest journals in the world, you make them too big to fail. A change in course isn't taken even when alarm bells are raised. This was demonstrated when several years after other scientists had been publishing pieces alleging Anversa's work is not reproducible, which, by the way, is a scientist passive-aggressive way of saying fake. Harvard instead offered him a full professorship. When I was looking for a PhD project years ago, before I started the one that I did, I met with a well-known professor working on cardiac stem cells. It wasn't Piero Anversa. And it sounded absolutely fascinating and exciting. I decided against it mostly because I knew that the red tape and the ethics process around stem cell research can be very, very slow moving and prohibitive, and I didn't want to waste so much time. But that might have been a good move in retrospect, because the whole field got turned upside down around the same time as slowly but surely the scale of Anversa and his colleagues' fraud became apparent. Over subsequent years, the evidence mounted that results had been faked, and Anversa's house of cardiac stem cells came crashing down. He blamed it on a member of his team, but as the lab lead, he surely knew what was going on. Collaborations with Roberto Bolli from Louisville, who also claimed ignorance of the fraud. Their famous study, Scipio, showed that, amongst other things, that one could harvest stem cells from the heart during surgery and use these to regenerate damaged tissue. It turned conventional wisdom on its head. It almost seemed easy. Just imagine how many teams all over the world excitedly tried to do the same in vain. Just imagine how many patients got their hopes up, only to have them dashed when nothing similar could be achieved. In some ways, it makes me think of alternative medicine when it becomes apparent that a previously well-accepted practice doesn't work, like homeopathy, for example. People don't drop it overnight. The human mind clings on to things it believes to be true. We struggle to turn our battleships round. What a monumental waste of time, both patients and researchers. Over on Retraction Watch, a website that I've mentioned before and a tremendously valuable resource, Anversa and Bolli's Scipio trial is the 7th most cited retracted paper in history.
Ladies and gentlemen, please let me sing. Let me tell a story so hideous and grim. It is just as crooked as a tortellini. It is about the surgeon Paolo Macchiarini. It was in Stockholm, Sweden, 2010. A surgeon was recruited by enterprising men. They celebrated with champagne and martini. Hooray, we got the superstar Paolo Macchiarini.
All of these stories could be standalone videos, and indeed this one has been the subject of gripping feature-length documentaries because it really has everything. Love, deception, Putin, the Pope, Russell Crowe. Here's a potted version of the story, and I'll concentrate on the science, obviously, and we don't even need to leave the subject of stem cells. As you've already heard, stem cells offered tremendous promise, but for quite a few years they were solution in need of a viable problem. Italian surgeon Paolo Macchiarini made headlines by performing a groundbreaking operation. This is the trachea, or the windpipe. You need it to breathe, and you need to breathe to live. Macchiarini said he'd transplanted a donor human trachea, but coated it in the recipient's stem cells to avoid the body rejecting it. Genius! Headlines ushered in a new dawn, the era of stem cell-enabled transplants. Today, something simple like a trachea, tomorrow livers and hearts. Maybe we can finally put an end to people dying on the organ transplant waiting list. Macchiarini was accordingly then headhunted by the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, a world-leading university especially for medical research, and of course where the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology is decided. So this truly is a dream job offer. And in Stockholm, he performs an even bolder operation. 39-year-old resident of Iceland, Maaariokaaart, receives a synthetic trachea, a plastic tube lined with his own stem cells. No rejection drugs, no problems. He appears to make a full recovery, and the press machine goes into overdrive. Macchiarini becomes perhaps the most famous practicing surgeon on the planet. But Bayén would actually die, painfully, 2.5 years later, as the trachea gradually failed, collapsed, and made his final days very unpleasant, I'm sure. A subsequent investigation showed that Macchiarini had denied him more conventional cancer treatment in lieu of an experimental procedure. The pattern would repeat as Macchiarini performed more of these operations, each time claiming success. Some patients did die, but the graft was working well, he said. Others were transferred mysteriously to a different hospital with no follow-up available, but they're doing fine, he said. Looking back, it's almost impossible to believe that everybody just went along with his claims and didn't ask for more proof. Now, I don't know how much scientific training you might have, but I think actually having less knowledge in the field helps. I'll assume that you don't know anything about stem cells. That makes two of us. But if I ask you whether a piece of plastic tube can support living cells or give them signals or some sort of matrix to tell them what to grow into, do you think that sounds likely? But this is chapter 3 in the Rockstar Doctor playbook. You have to create such a fairy tale that people are compelled to believe in it. And one particular person found her own personal fairy tale, Prince Charming. I actually learnt about this tragicomedy in 2016 from my wife, who had read an amazing article, she said, in Vanity Fair, which she showed to me, and it had quite a title and subheading: "The Celebrity Surgeon Who Used Love, Money, and the Pope to Scam an NBC News Producer." When Benita Alexander fell for celebrated Dr. Paolo Macchiarini while filming a documentary about him, she thought her biggest problem was a breach of journalistic ethics. Then things got really interesting. It's a great read. The link is below. Do check it out. Benita Alexander was a producer on the NBC documentary about Macchiarini that I mentioned earlier, and they embarked on a whirlwind romance. Before she knew it, they were engaged. A handsome, world-famous surgeon, fluent in 6 languages. Who would blame her? She quit her job, she took her daughter out of school in preparation for a move to Barcelona, and he started to plan the most extravagant of weddings. Before you accuse me of going all TMZ and reporting on relationship drama, actually I think highlighting some of the more outlandish boasts gives an insight into Macchiarini's psyche. It seems like he's just a pathological liar and actually ticks a lot of boxes on the characteristics of a psychopath. Not that I'm trying to diagnose remotely, but psychopathy we do see among surgeons in higher than average rates. It's one thing to make up medical results in order to further your career, but as you'll hear now, I really don't even know why he came up with these stories. It was clear that Benita Alexander was already besotted with him. He didn't need to claim to be the Pope's personal physician and friend, to be part of a global on-call team of doctors who respond to VIP medical emergencies around the world, which I know isn't true because I've never seen him at any of our meetings. And he claimed to have operated on Barack Obama, Emperor Akihito, and not one Clinton, but both Hillary and Bill. The next bit concerning the wedding, which was due to be officiated by the Pope, apparently, in spite of both parties being divorcees and only one being Catholic. I think I'll just read you directly from the Vanity Fair article because, mamma mia, it's so good. He told us the wedding would take place at the Pope's summer residence. The Pope was going to let Benita use his special carriage. Among the VIPs who Macchiarini said were planning to attend the wedding were Vladimir Putin, President and Mrs. Obama, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Francis Nicolas Sarkozy, and Russell Crowe. Obviously, I mean, in the film that Benita Alexander made about the whole affair, which was amusingly called He Lied About Everything, she said Russell Crowe for some reason. But, I mean, if I'm having a wedding in Rome, then of course I want Maximus Decimus Meridius fresh from the Colosseum. Macchiarini also told people that Andrea Bocelli would be singing during the service. As for food, Macchiarini was apparently sparing no expense. Fiorenza's Inoteca Pinchiori, with its 3 Michelin stars, was catering the affair. When Alexander's friend alerted her that the Pope's publicly viewable schedule had him in South America for the wedding date, she finally hired a private investigator and found that not only was he still married to his wife of 30 years, but he was living with his mistress. While this soap opera was unfolding, other researchers, some of whom had been invited to be co-authors on Macchiarini's studies, now convinced that his results were false, produced a 400-page investigation. What did the Karolinska Institute do? Well, they treated these guys like dirt. They filed a police report saying that they'd violated patient confidentiality by attempting to look up the patient's involved medical notes, and Macchiarini lodged a formal complaint that they had plagiarized him, severely affecting their careers permanently. But then a Swedish documentary came out on national TV alleging scientific misconduct, and finally the Karolinska Institute launched their own investigation into their star surgeon. And sure enough, they found him completely innocent. But by now, public outcry had become too loud. Multiple high-profile people at Karolinska started to resign, and finally, Macchiarini was fired in 2017. The doctors who raised the alarm were dragged down with him, either by being found culpable due to their involvement, even though they knew nothing of the fraud, or by being blacklisted to never receive any grant money again, and that apparently is still the case.
One day four doctors finally awakened and shouted out, "The emperor is naked!" But the board said, "How have you acquired these medical records? We could have you fired."
How did these 3 unfortunate episodes happen? And do consider these are just 3 in a specific niche of regenerative medicine that I've focused on, out of many, many more similar stories in every scientific field. I guess if it had to come down to one word, I'd say money, which is very on brand for a YouTube video essay. But I don't think that individuals in these cases themselves are motivated by money. It's more fame, power, or status. But they are certainly facilitated by journals and universities who see dollar signs growing among the stem cell cultures. And the wheels are further greased by gullible journalists dazzled by the elaborate smoke and mirrors. And I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other. At the end of the day, whatever motivation any of these people involved had, real patients died sooner than they would have otherwise, or they underwent useless therapies. Ultimately, let's remember, this is effectively putting your own career ahead of someone else's life. But if you fancy yourself as a medical maverick, remember the 3 key plays we've covered today. Number 1, be creative with the truth. Number 2, generate enough momentum that it's impossible to change course. And number 3, promise the world with your strongest possible conviction and people will jump on your bandwagon. However, if instead you fancy yourself as a skeptically minded potential patient, remember, if it's too good to be true, it almost certainly is. I feel like I have to say something about the fact that I have decided to highlight the questionable careers of 3 Italian men. I don't believe I have an unconscious bias against Italians, but if it's unconscious, how would I even know? I can't see how it's likely, because Mario and Luigi are literally icons in my own field of interventional cardiology. I am essentially a glorified plumber. But seriously, Italians are a huge presence in all fields of medical research. Some of the best colleagues and collaborators I've had in Cambridge and London have been Italian. There are loads working in medicine just in the UK. So you'll inevitably find some bad apples or bad olives amongst all the excellent researchers. Will this happen again? I guarantee it. The way academia is structured actually incentivizes this kind of behavior, but that is a topic for a future video. So please subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. And also a huge thank you to Henrik Widegren, who is a Swedish ENT surgeon with a sideline in hilarious medical songs. So go check out his channel. He very kindly let me use some of his Ballad of Paolo Macchiarini. And I'll end with some exciting double news. The streaming platform that a bunch of us creators founded and own, Nebula, has just passed 500,000 subscribers. This is genuinely incredible to have achieved so quickly, and why it makes me so happy is that signing up to Nebula is a great way to support me and all the other creators on the platform while getting yourself something as well. You can sign up right now at the link below. So what do you actually get? Well, not only a Nebula membership, but a subscription to CuriosityStream as well, and they are the sponsors of this video. If you enjoyed this slightly longer dive into a topic, CuriosityStream is made for you. It's got thousands of really high-end, high-quality documentaries about science, medicine, history, culture, loads more. Like this literal deep dive into coral that I enjoyed with my family last night. But if you, having just watched this particular video, I think you'll enjoy the genetics revolution, because it kicks off with an alternative, exciting new technique that could be used to combat heart disease. It's not stem cells, but maybe watch it and turn a critical eye on what is being claimed and see if you think that there is too much hype in medicine. And the double exciting news that I mentioned is that Nebula has also now launched a new venture called Nebula Classes, where you can learn all manner of skills from your favorite creators, from writing, making videos, music, even law. Sign up at the link below, use my code MEDLIFE to get access to Nebula and CuriosityStream for under $15 for a whole year. Nebula Classes is a new thing, so it's priced separately, but we're doing an introductory offer right now. I haven't made a class myself yet. We're working on something. So until next time, feel free to tell me what kind of classes I should be teaching, what other scientific scandals you're aware of. You can tweet me, you can email me, or just publish it in the Lancet and retract it later.
At last Macchiarini, together with the board, and the president were fired, thank the Lord. But they got new jobs, are safe and sound, while half a dozen patients lay in the ground. So why do I sing this? Why do I bore you? Because we must never forget this story. A mixture of Bergman and Fellini, the ballad of the surgeon Paolo Macchiarini, the superstar surgeon Paolo Macchiarini.